It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning for David Miller, a man who had built an empire out of nothing and turned his name into a symbol of success and generosity. He was the kind of millionaire people read about in magazines and watched on television with admiration, a man who seemed to have everything money could buy, yet deep inside, there was a quiet emptiness, a space in his heart that no amount of wealth or fame could ever fill. That morning, David woke up in his penthouse, overlooking the city. Skyline. The sunlight spilled across the marble floors as his assistant reminded him of his scheduled meetings, conference calls, and finally a visit to a local nursing home where he planned to make one of his biggest donations. Yet $500,000 to support the elderly who had no families and no one to care for them. He thought it would be another simple act of kindness, another box checked off his long list of charitable deeds. But destiny had different plans. When his black SUV pulled up in front of Sunrise Haven Nursing Home, he felt a strange calm. The building looked old, but peaceful. The kind of place where time moved slower and where memories clung to the walls like faded wallpaper. Few residents were sitting outside in wheelchairs, smiling at the morning breeze. Nurses moved around, gently chatting as birds chirped in the distance. David walked inside, carrying the confident air of a man who had given away millions, yet remained humble. The director of the home greeted him warmly and thanked him for his generosity. Cameras flashed as his team recorded short clips for their social media page. But as David looked around, something stirred in him he couldn't explain. Why but the smell of lavender? The soft hum of gospel music playing from a distant room. It all felt strangely familiar, like a whisper from a forgotten past. He paused near a hallway lined with photographs of past residents and caregivers. Each smile seemed to tell a story of love, loss, and survival. He didn't know why, but he felt a pull deeper into the building. As he followed the director, he heard a soft voice singing from somewhere nearby. The melody floated through the corridor, gentle yet haunting. It was Amazing Grace. The tune stopped him in his tracks. His chest tightened. His mind suddenly flooded with memories he hadn't visited in decades. A small kitchen, a woman humming while cooking breakfast, a warm hand ruffling his hair, and that same voice singing that same song. Something inside David whispered that this visit was about to change his life forever. David stood frozen in the hallway as the faint melody of Amazing Grace drifted through. The air, it wrapped around him like a ghost from another lifetime, stirring something deep in his soul. He tried to shake the feeling, to focus on the purpose of his visit, but his mind refused to let go of that sound. It was too familiar, too personal, too much like her. He took a slow breath, forcing a polite smile as the director continued speaking about the donation and the upgrades. They hoped to make new beds better, medical equipment, more staff. It was all noble, all good, but David's heart wasn't in the conversation anymore. His thoughts were spinning back to his childhood, the smell of cornbread in the oven, the warmth of a small living room, and the gentle voice of a woman who once told him he could be anything. That woman was Margaret Johnson, the black woman who had adopted him when he was just 6 years old. She wasn't wealthy, she didn't have a fancy job, but she had more love than anyone David had ever met. She worked long hours as a nurse's aide in a community hospital, and every night, no matter how tired she was, she would sit by his bed, read him a story, and tell him to dream big. She was his world, his family, his everything, but life hadn't been kind to them. When David was 12, Margaret suffered a terrible stroke. She was taken to a long-term care facility, and David was placed in foster care. He remembered the day they were separated, the way she tried to smile through her tears, the way she whispered, "I'll find you again, baby. Don't forget me." But time moved on, faster than promises could keep, and the boy who once held her hand grew up believing she was gone forever. Even as his company rose to success and his name appeared in magazines, David carried her lessons. In his heart, every big decision, every act of kindness traced back to her voice in his memory. He searched for her for years, hiring private investigators, checking records, calling hospitals, but every lead went cold. Eventually, he told himself she must have passed away. Now, standing in this nursing home surrounded by strangers and echoes of the past, David couldn't shake the feeling that fate had led him here for a reason. He didn't know it. Yet but in a few moments, the world he knew would never be the same again. The director guided David down a quiet hallway lined with rooms, each door marked by a small gold nameplate. Some residents sat in wheelchairs by their doors, others stared out of the windows, lost in thoughts that seemed miles away. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the faint scent of flowers from a vase someone had left on a nearby table. Everything felt still, too still. As they walked, David tried to refocus on his purpose. He was here to help, to make a difference, to show gratitude for all life had given him, but his mind kept drifting back to that melody, that voice, that memory. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him whispered, "Keep walking, keep listening." Then he saw her. An elderly woman sat near the far window, her hands resting gently on a blanket. Her skin was soft and wrinkled from time, her hair silver and thin. The sunlight fell across her face, and for a brief moment David's breath caught in his throat. She was humming again that same tune. Amazing grace, slow and steady. The exact same way Margaret used to sing when she wanted to calm him down after a bad dream. David froze. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He turned to the director, his voice barely steady, as he asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, what's her name?" The director looked at the clipboard, flipping through a few pages, before replying softly, "Oh, that's Margaret Johnson. Been here for nearly 30 years. No known family." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning. His hands trembled, his vision blurred. It couldn't be. It was impossible. 30 years, he thought, 30 years, since they had been torn apart. 30 years since he had heard her name spoken out loud. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood right in front of her. She didn't notice him at first. Her eyes were fixed on the window where the sunlight danced. Across the glass, he swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. As he said, "Mom," the woman blinked slowly, turning her head toward him. Her eyes searched his face, confused, uncertain, but then something in her expression shifted. Her lips parted. Her hand lifted just slightly, and in a trembling voice she said, "David, is that you?" The room went silent. The world seemed to stop around them, and for the first time in 3 decades, mother and son looked into each other's eyes again. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air in the room felt heavy, like time itself had paused. David's throat tightened, his chest ached with emotions he hadn't felt in years. He knelt slowly beside her chair, afraid that if he blinked, she might disappear, like a dream fading at dawn. Her eyes filled with tears, the same deep brown eyes that had once watched over him every night. Before bed, she reached out her trembling hand, touching his cheek as if to make sure he was real. Her fingers were cold, but her touch was exactly as he remembered, gentle, full of love and strength. She had always carried in her soul. "My baby," she whispered, her voice breaking into a soft sob. "I knew God wouldn't take me before. I saw you again." David held her hand against his face, tears spilling freely. He couldn't speak. All the words he had wanted to say for so many years were lost in the storm of emotion. He finally managed to whisper, "It's me, Mom. I found you. I never stopped looking." She smiled weakly, a mixture of disbelief and joy spreading across her face. The nurses nearby had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold in silence. One of them covered her mouth to hold back tears, while another placed a hand on her heart, whispering softly under her breath, "What a miracle." David felt like the little boy he once was, sitting at her feet, listening to her sing or helping her stir the soup in their small kitchen. Every memory rushed back at once, the laughter, the warmth, the love, the lessons, all of it alive again. In that moment, he hugged her, carefully, afraid to hurt her fragile frame, but desperate to hold on to her and never let go. "I thought I lost you forever," he said, his voice trembling. She brushed her thumb against his cheek and replied softly, "No, baby, you were never lost. God was just keeping you busy until it was time to come home." The room filled with quiet, sobs and soft smiles as mother and son clung to each other. 30 years of separation melted away in that one embrace. For David, the noise of the world disappeared. There was no fortune, no fame, no cameras, just him and the woman who had given him everything when she had nothing. And in that moment, he knew his life had just been rewritten forever. David spent the rest of that day by his mother's side, refusing to leave her for even a second. He listened as she spoke in her slow, gentle voice, telling him bits and pieces of the life she'd lived after they were separated. Her memories were patchy sometimes, drifting in and out, but every word she said felt sacred to him. She told him how after her stroke she had been moved from one care home to another, her health never strong enough to let her leave the system. She had waited for him, prayed for him, and asked about him whenever a new nurse arrived, hoping one day someone would say they had heard of her boy. She had no idea he had grown up to be the man who now sat beside her, the millionaire. With the kind eyes and the trembling smile, David listened silently, his heart breaking and healing all at once. He couldn't stop thinking about the years she had spent alone in quiet rooms. Like this, forgotten by the world. He felt guilt, but also gratitude, because somehow fate had led him here right to her. He held her hand tightly, promising she would never spend another day alone. That evening, he met with the director of the home again and told her he wanted to move Margaret into a private residence where she could have the best care possible. He arranged for a team of doctors, therapists, and nurses to look after her around the clock. The staff at Sunrise Haven were stunned, moved to tears by his determination. But for David, it wasn't about charity or publicity. It was about love. It was about giving back what she had given him when he had nothing as a child. When he left that night, he made her a promise. I'm coming back. Tomorrow, Mom, and every day. After that, you're not alone anymore. Over the next few weeks, he kept that promise. He brought her flowers, books, and her favorite meals from when he was little. They would sit on the porch of her new home, watching the sun go down. She would hum Amazing Grace, and he would smile sometimes, joining in with a shaky laugh. She told him again and again how proud she was of him, but he always shook his head and said, "You're the reason I became who I am. Mom, you taught me to believe." And for the first time in decades, they both felt whole again. In the months that followed, David and Margaret became inseparable. Every Sunday he visited without fail, sitting beside her on the porch as she sipped sweet tea and hummed her favorite hymns. They laughed about old memories. He showed her pictures of the life he had built, and every time she looked at him, her eyes filled with pride. She would say, "You did good, baby. You made every sacrifice worth it." David went on to create the Margaret Hope Foundation, named in her honor. Its mission was simple: to help reunite families separated by illness, poverty, and the foster system. The story of his reunion with his adoptive mother spread across the world, inspiring millions of people to reach out to their parents, grandparents, and loved ones. The video of their first embrace at the nursing home went viral, with people calling it one of the most heartwarming moments ever captured. In every interview, David refused to talk about his wealth or his success. Instead, he always said, "The greatest fortune I've ever found wasn't in business or money. It was in a mother's love that never gave up on me." Even after 30 years, Margaret's health improved, with care, laughter, and love filling her days. She told everyone that she was living proof that miracles don't have deadlines, that sometimes God just waits for the right moment to bring two hearts back together. She passed peacefully 3 years later, holding her son's hand, whispering that same old promise, "Don't forget me, baby, and don't stop helping others." After her funeral, David stood under the same old tree from their childhood yard, looking up at the sky with tears in his eyes. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." Then he smiled through his tears, because he knew she was proud, watching from above. And from that day on, David lived not as a man defined by money, but as a son who had been blessed twice in life, once by love and once by finding it again. A mother's love never fades, no matter how many years pass. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love, because sometimes the miracle you're looking for is just one visit away. Fades on screen. Subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire the heart.